The auctioneer's voice cut through the saloon like a knife through gut. Sold 200 acres and the girl to Declan Crowe. Rosalie Mercer stood frozen at the altar, 20 years old, dressed in her dead mother's wedding gown, staring at the back of a man she'd never spoken to. Her father had gambled everything away, land, livestock, dignity, and the only currency left was her. Black Hollow Ridge didn't trade in mercy, it traded in survival. And tonight, she'd just been bought by the most dangerous man in the valley. Before we begin Rosalie's story, I want to invite you to follow along until the very end. If this story resonates with you, please hit the like button and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far her journey travels. The church smelled like old wood and older lies. Rosalie stood at the end of the aisle, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles had gone white. The dress hung loose on her frame, her mother's dress, yellowed at the edges, smelling faintly of lavender and grief. It had been packed away for years, waiting for a wedding that was supposed to mean something. Not this. Never this. Her father sat in his front pew, shoulders slumped, hat in his lap. He wouldn't look at her. Hadn't looked at her since the morning he'd told her the arrangement was done. It's Crowe or the street, Rosalie. That's all there is. She'd asked him if he was ashamed. He'd walked out of the room. Now the preacher stood at the altar, Bible open, expression carefully blank. Reverend Moss had married half the territory. He'd seen every kind of union, love, convenience, desperation. This one didn't even pretend to be anything but a transaction. Declan Crowe stood beside the preacher, hands behind his back, face unreadable. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark wool that looked expensive but worn. His hair was black, starting to silver at the temples. His jaw was hard, unshaven, and his eyes, gray, sharp, cold as creek water in winter, hadn't left her since she'd walked through the door. Rosalie had heard the stories. Everyone had. Declan Crowe didn't talk much, didn't drink, didn't come to town unless he had to. He owned more land than anyone in the valley, ran cattle and horses, paid his debts on time, and kept to himself. His first wife had died years ago. Some said childbirth. Others said fever. No one really knew, because Declan never spoke of it. The child had died too. After that, he'd become a ghost in his own life, present, functional, but hollow. Cold as a corpse, the women said. Ruthless, the men muttered. Rosalie didn't know what to believe. All she knew was that her father owed him money, land, and pride, and the only way to settle it was standing right here in a dress that didn't fit, about to promise her life to a stranger. Reverend Moss cleared his throat. Shall we begin? Declan nodded once. Rosalie said nothing. The Reverend didn't wait for her agreement. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here. The words blurred. Rosalie stared at the floor, at the scuffed planks beneath her feet, at the hem of the dress pooling around her boots. She'd worn boots. She didn't own proper shoes anymore. Her father had sold them last winter. Do you, Declan Crowe, take this woman? I do. His voice was low, steady, without inflection, like signing a receipt. Rosalie's stomach turned. And do you, Rosalie Mercer, take this man? She hesitated. The silence stretched. Someone in the pews coughed. Her father shifted. Declan didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. Rosalie lifted her chin, met his eyes. They were unreadable, flat, giving nothing away. I do, she whispered. It felt like surrender. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife. The Reverend closed the Bible. No one clapped. No one smiled. This wasn't that kind of wedding. Declan turned to her, and for a moment she thought he might say something, offer some reassurance, some scrap of kindness. Instead, he just nodded toward the door. We should go. That was it. No kiss, no vows exchanged in private. Just a directive. Rosalie followed him outside. The wagon was waiting in front of the church, a sturdy flatbed hitched to 2 draft horses. Declan climbed up, took the reins, then reached down to offer her a hand. She stared at it, calloused, scarred, strong, then took it. His grip was firm, but not rough. He pulled her up beside him without effort, and she settled onto the bench, smoothing the dress over her knees. Her father appeared at the side of the wagon, hat still in his hands. He looked older than she remembered, tired, used up. Rosalie, don't, she said quietly. He flinched. I didn't have a choice. Neither did I. He opened his mouth, closed it, then stepped back. Declan didn't acknowledge him, just clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward. Rosalie didn't look back. They rode in silence. The town fell away behind them. The saloon, the general store, the crooked post office. The road turned to dirt, then to ruts, then to open land. The valley stretched wide and empty under a sky so pale it looked drained of color. Winter was coming. You could feel it in the air, sharp and clean, warning of snow. Rosalie pulled her shawl tighter. Declan didn't seem to notice the cold. He sat upright, reins loose in his hands, eyes on the horizon. She studied him from the corner of her eye. He wasn't handsome, not in the way young men were handsome, but there was something about him, something solid, immovable, like he'd been carved from the same stone as the mountains in the distance. After what felt like an hour, she finally spoke. "How far is it?" "Another mile." His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. She nodded, swallowed. What should I call you?" He glanced at her, just briefly. "Declan's fine. And you'll call me Rosalie? If that's what you want." It wasn't a question, it wasn't warm, but it wasn't cruel either, just neutral. She didn't know what to do with that. They crested a low hill, and the ranch came into view. It wasn't what she'd expected. The house was large, built from dark timber and stone, with a wide porch and a sloped roof. Smoke rose from the chimney. There were corrals, a barn, a stable, all well maintained. Fences stretched in every direction, neat and sturdy. The land rolled out in waves, dotted with cattle and horses, framed by distant ridges. It was beautiful, quiet, isolated. Declan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and set the brake. He climbed down, then came around to her side. Again he offered his hand. Again she took it. Her boots hit the ground and she stood there, uncertain, clutching her shawl. Declan gestured toward the house. "I'll show you inside." She followed him up the porch steps. The door wasn't locked. He pushed it open and stepped aside, letting her enter first. The interior was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, already lit and crackling. There was a table, chairs, a few shelves lined with books, a rug on the floor, faded but intact. Everything was orderly, sparse, no photographs, no personal touches. Rosalie stood in the center of the room, unsure where to put herself. Declan closed the door behind them. "I'll bring your things in." "I don't have much," she said quietly. He nodded. "Still." He left. Rosalie exhaled slowly, alone for the first time since the ceremony. She crossed to the fireplace, held her hands out to the warmth. Her reflection flickered in the window glass. Pale, thin, lost. She barely recognized herself. Declan returned carrying a small trunk, everything she owned. He set it down near the stairs. "Your room's upstairs, first door on the left." She blinked. "My room?" "You'll have your own space." I thought..." "You thought wrong." His tone wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. "I'm not expecting anything from you, Rosalie. Not tonight, not any night." She stared at him, thrown completely off balance. "Then why did you..." "Your father owed me. I settled the debt, that's all." "By marrying me?" "By giving you a place to be." He met her eyes, and for the first time there was something in them, something almost like weariness. "You don't owe me anything. You're not a servant. You're not property. You're here because the alternative was worse." Rosalie's throat tightened. She didn't know if she wanted to cry or scream or laugh. "I don't understand." "You don't have to." He turned toward the kitchen. "I'll make supper. You should rest." And then he was gone, leaving her standing in the middle of a stranger's house, wearing a dead woman's dress, more confused than she'd ever been in her life. The room upstairs was small but comfortable. A bed, a chair, a washstand, a single window overlooking the valley. Rosalie sat on the edge of the bed, still in the wedding dress, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. She'd expected cruelty, expected to be used, controlled, diminished. She'd braced herself for it, hardened herself against it. But this? Distance? Respect? She didn't know what to do with kindness from a man who wasn't supposed to have any. Downstairs she heard the clatter of pots, the scrape of a chair. Declan moving through the house like she wasn't even there. Rosalie stood, stripped off the dress, and hung it in the wardrobe. She pulled on one of her own plain skirts and a blouse, then splashed water on her face from the basin. Her hands were shaking. When she finally went back downstairs, Declan was at the stove, stirring something in a pot. He glanced up when she entered, but didn't comment on the change of clothes. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the table. She sat. He ladled stew into 2 bowls, set one in front of her, then took the seat across from her. They ate in silence. The stew was simple: beef, potatoes, carrots, but it was hot and filling. Rosalie hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating. Declan finished first. He pushed his bowl aside, leaned back in his chair, and studied her. "You know how to ride?" he asked. She shook her head. "No." "Cook?" "A little." "Shoot?" "No." He nodded slowly as if filing the information away. "You'll learn." "Why?" "Because out here, you need to." She set down her spoon. "What do you want from me, Declan?" He considered the question, then shrugged. "Nothing you're not willing to give." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." She wanted to push, to demand clarity, but something in his expression stopped her. He wasn't being evasive. He was being honest. He genuinely didn't expect anything from her. It should have been a relief. Instead, it made her feel unmoored. The days that followed were strange. Declan woke before dawn, worked outside until dusk, then came in for supper. He was polite, distant, efficient. He showed her where things were kept, how to manage the fire, how to feed the chickens. He answered her questions with patience, but never offered more than she asked for. At night, he slept downstairs on a cot near the fireplace. He never came upstairs, never knocked on her door, never asked for her company. Rosalie didn't know what to make of him. She tried to make herself useful, sweeping, mending, cooking. But the house was already clean, and Declan didn't seem to care whether she did anything or not. He didn't praise her efforts, didn't criticize her mistakes, just accepted whatever she did with a quiet nod. It was maddening. One morning, a week after the wedding, she found him in the barn repairing a saddle. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Why did you really marry me?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Told you already." "No, you told me you settled a debt. That's not the same thing." He pulled a strap tight, tested it, then finally met her eyes. "Your father was going to lose everything. You would have ended up on the street, or worse. I had the means to prevent that, so I did." "Out of charity? Out of pragmatism?" "That's a cold way to put it." "It's an honest way." She stepped closer. "Did you even want a wife?" His jaw tightened. For the first time, she saw something crack in his composure. "No." The word was quiet, but it hit like a slap. Rosalie's breath caught. "Then why?" "Because I didn't want you to suffer for your father's mistakes." He set the saddle aside, stood, towering over her. "I don't need a wife, Rosalie. I don't need company. I don't need affection. But I also don't need another ghost on my conscience." She stared at him, stunned. He walked past her, out into the cold morning air, leaving her alone in the barn. Winter came fast. The first snow fell in early November, blanketing the valley in white. The temperature dropped and the wind howled through the gaps in the barn walls. Declan worked harder, longer, moving cattle to lower pastures, reinforcing fences, stockpiling firewood. Rosalie helped where she could. She learned to chop kindling, to carry water from the well, to keep the fire going through the night. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her back ached. But she didn't complain. Declan noticed. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, he glanced at her hands. "You're getting stronger." She looked down at her rough palms. "I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice." She met his eyes. "Do I?" He held her gaze for a long moment, then looked away. "More than you think." The town didn't forget about her. Rosalie knew that even out here, miles from Black Hollow Ridge, she was still being talked about. The girl who'd been sold to Declan Crowe, the purchased bride, the arrangement everyone whispered about but no one acknowledged to her face. When Declan went into town for supplies, he went alone. He never asked her to come. She suspected it was intentional. He was shielding her from the stares, the judgment, but she couldn't hide forever. One afternoon, she convinced him to let her ride along. "I need fabric," she said, "and thread. He looked at her, skeptical. You sure? I can't stay on the ranch forever, Declan. He didn't argue. The ride into town was quiet. When they arrived, Declan parked the wagon outside the general store and helped her down. I'll be at the feed office. Meet me back here in an hour. She nodded. Inside the store, the clerk, a thin, sour-faced woman named Mrs. Hadley, watched her like she might steal something. Rosalie ignored her, browsing the bolts of fabric, running her fingers over wool and cotton. Behind her, she heard the whispers. That's her. Crowe's wife. Poor thing. Wonder how long she'll last. Rosalie's face burned, but she kept her head down, selected what she needed, and brought it to the counter. Mrs. Hadley rang it up without a word, took her money, and handed over the package. As Rosalie turned to leave, a woman stepped into her path. She was older, maybe 40, dressed in expensive wool, her hair pinned severely. Rosalie recognized her, Mrs. Gaines, wife of the largest cattle baron in the valley. You're Rosalie Mercer, Mrs. Gaines said. Not a question. Rosalie Crowe now, Rosalie corrected quietly. Mrs. Gaines smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course. How fortunate for you. Rosalie said nothing. Tell me, Mrs. Gaines continued, how does it feel to be bought? The words were a knife. Rosalie's hands tightened on the package. I wouldn't know. I was married, not sold. Is there a difference? There is when you choose to stay. Mrs. Gaines's smile faded. Did you choose? Rosalie lifted her chin. I'm still here, aren't I? She stepped around the woman and walked out. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't cry. Declan was waiting by the wagon. He took one look at her face and said, What happened? Nothing. Rosalie, I said nothing. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. They rode home in silence. That night, Rosalie lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling. Mrs. Gaines' words echoed in her head. How does it feel to be bought? She didn't have an answer, but she was starting to realize that maybe the question didn't matter. What mattered was what she did next. The cold deepened. By mid-November, ice formed on the water troughs every morning, and the wind cut through clothing like it had teeth. Rosalie woke before dawn now, not because anyone told her to, but because lying in bed while Declan worked outside felt wrong. She dressed quickly, went downstairs, and found him already gone, out feeding livestock, checking fences, doing the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch alive through winter. She started the fire, made coffee, set out bread and butter. When he came in an hour later, stamping snow off his boots, she had breakfast waiting. He paused in the doorway, surprised. You didn't have to. I know. He hung his coat on the hook, crossed to the table, and sat. They ate without talking. It had become their routine, quiet mornings, shared work, few words. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was just theirs. After breakfast, Declan pushed his plate aside and looked at her. I need to move cattle today, down to the south pasture before the next storm hits. Rosalie nodded. All right. I could use help. She blinked. Me? You're the only one here. I don't know how You'll learn. He stood, grabbed his coat. Get dressed warm. We leave in 10 minutes. She didn't argue. Outside, the air was sharp enough to sting. Declan led her to the barn, where 2 horses were already saddled, a big roan gelding for him and a smaller bay mare. He gestured to the mare. This is Clover. She's calm. Won't spook easy. Rosalie stared at the horse. Clover looked back with dark, patient eyes. I know. Declan moved to her side, took her left hand, placed it on the saddle horn. Left foot in the stirrup. Push off with your right. I'll steady you. She did as he said, awkward and uncertain, and somehow ended up in the saddle. It felt impossibly high. The horse shifted beneath her, and Rosalie grabbed the horn with both hands. Relax, Declan said. She can feel when you're tense. I am tense. Then fake it. He swung onto his own horse with the ease of someone who'd been riding since childhood. He gathered the reins, glanced back at her. Just hold on, follow me. Don't overthink it. They rode out into the valley. The cattle were scattered across the north pasture, dark shapes against white snow. Declan circled wide, moving slow, and the herd started drifting south. Rosalie did her best to stay out of the way, gripping the reins like her life depended on it. Clover plodded along, unbothered, and gradually Rosalie's hands stopped shaking. Declan rode up beside her. "You're doing fine." "I'm terrified." "That's normal." "Does it get easier?" "Eventually." They worked for hours, guiding the cattle through gates, across frozen creeks, down into the sheltered pasture near the southern ridge. Declan didn't say much, but he stayed close, correcting her grip, showing her how to turn the horse, how to read the cattle's movement. By the time they finished, Rosalie's legs ached and her back was sore, but she'd kept up. As they rode back toward the house, Declan glanced at her. "You did well." "I barely knew what I was doing." "But you didn't quit." She looked at him, caught off guard by the almost compliment. "Would you have let me?" "No." Despite herself, she smiled. That night, her whole body hurt. She sank into a chair by the fire, wincing as her muscles protested. Declan noticed. He disappeared into the back room and returned with a tin of salve. "For your hands," he said, setting it on the table. She looked down. Her palms were blistered from the rains. "Thank you." He nodded and went back to whatever he was doing. Rosalie opened the tin, rubbed the salve into her skin, and felt the sting ease. She watched him across the room, methodical, quiet, always moving. He never stopped working, never sat idle, as if stillness was something he couldn't afford. She wondered what he was running from. The next morning, he taught her how to muck stalls. The morning after that, how to mend tack. Then how to sharpen an axe, split firewood, check a horse's hooves for stones. Every day, something new. Every day, she got a little stronger, a little more capable, and every day, the distance between them shrank, just slightly. One afternoon, while they were repairing a section of fence near the creek, Rosalie finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her for weeks. "Your first wife," she said, hammering a nail into a post. "What was her name?" Declan's hand stilled. He didn't look at her. "Catherine." Rosalie waited, giving him space to say more. He didn't. "How long were you married?" 3 years. "And the child?" His jaw tightened. "A son." He didn't make it past his first winter. The words were flat, stripped of feeling, but Rosalie heard the weight beneath them. She set down her hammer. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." "Doesn't make it easier." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment something raw flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone. He picked up another board, measured it, cut it. "No, it doesn't." They worked in silence after that. But something had shifted. She'd seen a crack in the armor he wore, and he'd let her. December came. The snow piled higher. The days grew shorter. The ranch felt even more isolated, cut off from the rest of the world. Rosalie didn't mind. Out here, no one whispered about her. No one judged. It was just her and Declan and the land. But the town hadn't forgotten. One morning, a rider appeared on the ridge, a young man named Tom Fisher who worked for the Gaines family. He rode down to the house, dismounted, and handed Declan an envelope. "Mrs. Gaines is hosting a Christmas gathering," Tom said, glancing nervously at Rosalie. "She wanted to make sure you both received an invitation." Declan opened the envelope, skimmed the contents, then handed it back. "Tell her we'll pass." Tom blinked. "Sir, it's... everyone in the valley will be there. Then they won't miss us." "But we're not coming." Tom looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Declan's expression stopped him. He nodded, remounted, and rode off. Rosalie stood on the porch, arms crossed. "You didn't even ask me." Declan turned. "You want to go?" "No, but you could have asked. Would it have changed your answer?" She hesitated. "No." "Then I saved us both the trouble." He walked back inside, leaving her on the porch. Rosalie stared after him, frustrated. He was right, of course. She had no desire to face the women of Black Hollow Ridge again, but the way he'd made the decision without consulting her still stung. That night she brought it up. "You know, just because I'm here doesn't mean you get to decide everything for me." Declan looked up from the ledger he was writing in. "I didn't decide for you. I decided for us." "What's the difference?" "The difference is, I won't put you in a room full of people who look at you like you're something shameful." Her breath caught. "So you do know what they say?" "Of course I know." He set down his pen. "I've known since the day we married, and I don't care. Well, I do. Why? Because it's my name they're dragging through the mud, Declan, not just yours. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. You think going to that gathering will change their minds? Maybe. It won't. You don't know that. I do. His voice was hard now, edged with something bitter. They'll smile to your face and tear you apart the second you leave. They'll make you feel small, worthless, bought, and you'll come home wishing you'd never gone. Rosalie crossed her arms. You're not giving me much credit. I'm trying to protect you. I didn't ask for protection. Too bad. You're getting it anyway. They stared at each other across the room, neither willing to back down. Finally, Rosalie shook her head. You're impossible. So are you. Despite the tension, the corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Rosalie threw up her hands and went upstairs. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she realized something. Declan wasn't trying to control her. He was trying to shield her. And maybe that was worse, because it meant he thought she couldn't handle it, that she was still fragile, still breakable. She wasn't. Not anymore. The weeks passed. Christmas came and went without ceremony. Declan didn't celebrate much of anything, and Rosalie didn't push. On Christmas morning, she found a new pair of leather gloves on the kitchen table, her size, well made, lined with wool. No note, no explanation. She wore them every day after that. In January, the storms hit hard. Snow fell for 3 days straight, burying the ranch in drifts taller than Rosalie. They were trapped inside, burning through firewood, rationing supplies. Declan paced like a caged animal, restless and tense. He wasn't used to being idle. On the 4th day, the sky cleared. Declan went out to dig paths to the barn, the chicken coop, the well. Rosalie followed, shovel in hand. They worked side by side, carving tunnels through the snow, their breath fogging in the frozen air. You don't have to help, Declan said, heaving another load of snow aside. I know. Then why are you? Because I live here too. He glanced at her, and for the first time in weeks he looked almost pleased. Fair enough. They dug until their arms burned and their backs screamed. When they finally went inside, they collapsed by the fire, too exhausted to speak. Rosalie's hand shook as she pulled off her gloves. Declan handed her a cup of coffee without a word. She took it, their fingers brushing. Neither of them pulled away. The touch lasted only a second, but it felt significant, like a door opening, just a crack. That night, as Rosalie lay in bed, she thought about the past few months, how different everything was from what she'd expected. She'd thought marriage to Declan Crowe would be a prison, but instead it had become something else, something quieter, harder to define. She wasn't happy, exactly, but she wasn't miserable either. She was settling, and she wasn't sure how she felt about that. By February, the worst of the winter had passed. The snow started to melt, revealing patches of brown earth and dead grass. Rosalie began planning a garden, something small, manageable. She sketched it out on paper, choosing vegetables that could survive the harsh climate. Carrots, potatoes, beans. Declan watched her work, leaning against the doorframe. You know how to garden? My mother taught me, before she died. How old were you? 12. He nodded slowly. That's young to lose a parent. She was sick for a long time. I knew it was coming. Rosalie set down her pencil. Didn't make it easier, though. It never does. She looked up at him. How old were you when you lost Catherine? 30. And your son? His expression shuddered. We're not talking about that. Why not? Because it doesn't help. Maybe it would. It wouldn't. He turned and walked away, ending the conversation. Rosalie sighed. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's how it went with Declan. He let her in, then shut her out, over and over. She was starting to understand it wasn't cruelty. It was survival. He'd buried so much grief that digging it up felt dangerous. But eventually, he'd have to face it. They both would. One morning in late February, Declan came in from checking the cattle and found Rosalie sitting at the table, staring at an unopened letter. He frowned. What's that? It came yesterday from my father. You didn't open it? I didn't want to. Declan pulled out a chair, sat across from her. You want me to? She shook her head. No, I'll do it. She broke the seal, unfolded the paper, and read. Her expression didn't change, but her hands tightened on the letter. Declan waited. Finally, she set it down. He wants to visit. When? Next month. Are you going to let him? Rosalie laughed, but it was sharp, bitter. Let him? He's my father. I don't get to say no. You absolutely do. She looked at him, startled. You'd really turn him away? If you wanted me to, yes. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then quietly she said, I don't know what I want. Then take your time, figure it out. And if I decide I don't want to see him, then he doesn't come. It was that simple for Declan, black and white. No guilt, no obligation, just choice. Rosalie envied that clarity. A week later, she wrote back to her father. The letter was short, polite, distant. She told him he could visit in April, when the roads were passable. She didn't say she was looking forward to it, because she wasn't. March brought rain instead of snow. The valley turned muddy, the creek swelled, and the ranch became a mess of slick paths and waterlogged fields. Rosalie spent most of her time inside, mending clothes, baking bread, reading the few books Declan owned. She was restless, itching for something to do. One afternoon, she found a crate in the barn, old, dusty, shoved in a corner. Inside were clothes, women's clothes, Catherine's clothes. Rosalie stared at them, her chest tight. She heard footsteps behind her. Declan stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. I didn't know these were here, she said quietly. I forgot about them. Do you want me to? Do whatever you want with them. His voice was flat. They're just cloth. But they weren't, and he knew it. Rosalie closed the crate, left it where it was. That night she didn't mention it, neither did he, but the weight of it hung between them. April arrived. The rain stopped. The sun came out, pale and watery, but it was warmth nonetheless. Rosalie started her garden, turning soil, planting seeds. Declan helped when he had time, building a fence to keep out deer and rabbits. They worked side by side, hands dirty, backs aching, and for the first time Rosalie felt something close to contentment. Then her father came. He arrived on a borrowed horse, looking thinner than she remembered, older, worn down. Declan met him at the gate, arms crossed, expression hard. Mr. Mercer. Crowe. Her father dismounted, glanced past him toward the house. Is Rosalie here? She is. Can I see her? Declan didn't move. Depends. On what? On whether you're here to apologize or make excuses. Her father's jaw tightened. That's between me and my daughter. Not anymore. Declan's voice was low, dangerous. You sold her to settle your debts. You don't get to walk back in here and pretend you're still her father. I am her father. Then act like it. They stared at each other, tension crackling in the air. Finally, her father looked away. I made mistakes. I know that. Knowing it isn't enough. Then what is? That's not for me to decide. Declan stepped aside, letting him pass. Rosalie was in the kitchen when her father walked in. She looked up, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then he said, Rosalie, Father. He took off his hat, twisted it in his hands. You look different. I am different. He nodded, swallowed. I wanted to see how you were, make sure you were all right. I'm fine. Are you happy? The question caught her off guard. She glanced at Declan, who stood in the doorway, watching, then back at her father. I'm managing. Her father's face fell. I'm sorry, Rosalie. For everything. I didn't know what else to do. You could have asked me. Would it have mattered? Yes. He flinched. I thought he'd take care of you, that you'd be safe. I am safe. Her voice was hard now. But not because you planned it, because Declan's a better man than you gave him credit for. Her father looked at Declan, then back at her. I see. They stood in silence, the years of hurt and resentment filling the space between them. Finally, her father said, I should go. Rosalie didn't stop him. He put his hat back on, nodded to Declan, and walked out. Rosalie watched him ride away, her hands clenched at her sides. Declan came up beside her. You all right? I don't know. That's fair. She turned to him, her eyes burning. Why did you do it? Why did you really marry me? He met her gaze, and for once, he didn't look away. Because I know what it's like to lose everything. And I didn't want that for you. Her breath hitched. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. They stood there, inches apart, the air between them charged with something neither of them could name. Then Declan stepped back. I've got work to do. And he was gone. Rosalie stood alone in the kitchen, her heart pounding, her mind spinning. She was starting to realize something terrifying. She didn't just live here anymore. She cared. Spring arrived in pieces. First the mud, then the green shoots pushing through thawed earth, then the birds returning to nest in the barn rafters. Rosalie's garden took root, small, stubborn plants clawing their way toward sunlight. She checked them every morning, pulling weeds, adjusting stakes, talking to them like they might answer back. Declan watched from a distance, arms crossed, leaning against the fence. He never said much, but she could feel his attention. It wasn't intrusive, just present. One morning, she found him kneeling beside the garden, running his fingers over the soil. It's too wet here, he said without looking up. You'll lose the carrots to rot. What should I do? Dig a drainage trench, I'll show you. They spent the afternoon together, carving shallow channels through the earth, redirecting water away from the rows. Rosalie's hands were caked with mud, her back screaming by the time they finished. But when she stood back and looked at what they'd built, she felt something unfamiliar. Pride, maybe. Or ownership. Declan wiped his hands on his pants, studied their work. That'll hold. Thank you. He glanced at her, surprised. For what? For caring. He didn't respond, just nodded once and walked back toward the barn. But that night, when Rosalie came downstairs for supper, there was a packet of flower seeds on the table. No note, no explanation. She picked it up, read the label. Wildflowers. Hardy, drought-resistant, the kind that could survive out here. She planted them the next morning along the fence line. The town hadn't forgotten about them. That became clear when Mrs. Hadley from the general store showed up unannounced one afternoon, driving a wagon loaded with fabric samples. She claimed she was making rounds, drumming up business for the spring sewing season, but Rosalie knew better. Mrs. Hadley wanted to see how the purchased bride was faring. Declan was out with the horses, so Rosalie received her alone. She made tea, set out biscuits, and invited the woman inside with as much politeness as she could muster. Mrs. Hadley settled into a chair, her sharp eyes cataloging everything. The clean floors, the mended curtains, the vase of early wildflowers on the table. You've made the place quite homey, Mrs. Hadley said, her tone carefully neutral. I've tried. And Mr. Crowe? He treats you well? Rosalie met her gaze. He does. That's good. That's very good. Mrs. Hadley sipped her tea, then leaned forward slightly. You know, there was some concern when the arrangement was first announced. People wondered if what? If you'd be all right, out here, alone with him. Rosalie set down her cup. I'm fine, Mrs. Hadley. Better than I was. Of course. Of course. The woman's smile was thin. It's just that Mr. Crowe has always been so private, hard to read. After what happened with his first wife, what happened with Catherine? Mrs. Hadley blinked, caught off guard. Oh, well, I assumed you knew. I know she died. And the child, that's all. The older woman hesitated, clearly debating how much to say. Finally, she leaned in, voice dropping. She died in childbirth. The baby came early, in the middle of winter. The midwife couldn't get here in time. Mr. Crowe tried to deliver the child himself, but Rosalie's chest tightened. But what? He couldn't save either of them. They say he held that baby for hours after it stopped breathing. Wouldn't let anyone near. When they finally took the bodies away, he burned everything. The cradle, the blankets, Catherine's clothes, everything. Rosalie felt sick. That's why the house is so empty. He couldn't stand reminders. Mrs. Hadley shook her head. Poor man, he was never the same after. Stopped talking to people. Stopped coming to town except when necessary. Just shut down. Rosalie stared at her hands, processing. All this time she'd thought Declan was cold by nature. But he wasn't. He was wounded. hollowed out by loss so deep he couldn't risk feeling anything again. Mrs. Hadley stood, gathering her things. "Well, I should be going. If you need anything, dear, you know where to find me." Rosalie walked her to the door, mind racing. When Mrs. Hadley's wagon disappeared down the road, Rosalie turned and found Declan standing in the barn doorway. He'd been there the whole time, listening. Their eyes met across the yard. He turned and walked away. That night, Rosalie couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Catherine, about Declan trying to save his wife and child alone in this house, failing, then living with that failure every single day. She thought about the crate of clothes in the barn, the empty nursery he must have dismantled, the life he'd buried because remembering it was too painful. She got out of bed, went downstairs. Declan was at the table, staring at a half-empty glass of whiskey. He didn't look up when she entered. Rosalie sat across from him. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For asking Mrs. Hadley about Catherine. I shouldn't have—" "You have a right to know. But not like that." He finally looked at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "It doesn't matter how you found out. The story doesn't change." "Declan, I couldn't save them." His voice cracked, just barely. "I tried. I did everything I could think of. And it wasn't enough." Rosalie reached across the table, placed her hand over his. "It wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it?" "No." He pulled his hand away, stood, crossed to the window. "I brought her out here, to the middle of nowhere. No doctor within 50 miles. I knew the risks, and I did it anyway because I wanted this place, this life. And it killed her." "You didn't kill her. Life did. The wilderness did. Bad luck did." "Doesn't matter. She's still gone." Rosalie stood, walked over to him. "Is that why you married me? To make up for what happened to her?" He turned, and the look on his face was raw, unguarded. "I married you because I couldn't stand the thought of another woman suffering because of a man's selfishness. Your father's, mine, doesn't matter. I had the power to stop it, so I did." "That's not selfish, Declan. That's decent. Decent men don't let their wives die in childbirth. Decent men don't blame themselves for things they can't control." He laughed, bitter and hollow. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Her voice sharpened. "You think you're the only one who's lost someone? My mother wasted away in front of me. I watched her shrink, fade, disappear, and when she finally died, I was relieved." "Relieved, Declan, because it meant she wasn't suffering anymore." "You think I don't carry that?" He stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "We're both broken," Rosalie said quietly. "The difference is, I'm trying to put myself back together, and you're just stuck." For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "I don't know how." Her heart cracked open. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of him. "Then let me help." He looked down at her, conflict written all over his face. "I can't ask that of you." "You're not asking. I'm offering." His hand came up, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. "You shouldn't." Too late. They stood there inches apart, something unspoken passing between them. Then Declan dropped his hand, stepped back. "You should go to bed." "So should you." "I will, in a minute." But she knew he wouldn't. He'd stay down here staring at nothing until exhaustion finally dragged him under. Rosalie went back upstairs, but she didn't sleep. She'd crossed a line tonight, admitted something she hadn't fully understood herself. She cared about Declan Crowe, not because she had to, because she wanted to, and that was terrifying. The next few days were awkward. Declan avoided her when he could, buried himself in work when he couldn't. Rosalie let him. She understood the instinct to retreat when things got too real. She'd done it herself plenty of times, but she also knew they couldn't keep dancing around this forever. The opportunity came on a Saturday in late April. Declan mentioned he needed to ride into town for supplies. Rosalie, tired of being cooped up on the ranch, insisted on coming. He hesitated. "You sure?" "I can't hide forever." "You're not hiding. You're avoiding unnecessary trouble." "Same thing." He sighed. "All right. But if anyone says something, I'll handle it." They rode in together, the wagon creaking over ruts and stones. The town was busier than usual, market day. Stalls lined the main street, selling everything from produce to tools to livestock. People crowded the boardwalks, talking, haggling, gossiping. Rosalie felt their stares the moment they arrived. Declan helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady on her arm. "Stay close. I'm not a child." "I know, but they'll try to corner you if you're alone." She wanted to argue, but he was probably right. They split up to cover more ground. Declan went to the feed office, Rosalie to the general store. Mrs. Hadley greeted her with a thin smile and far too much interest in what she was buying. Rosalie kept her answer short, paid quickly, and left. Outside, she ran into Tom Fisher, the young ranch hand from the Gaines place. He tipped his hat. "Mrs. Crowe?" "Tom." "You settling in all right?" "Well enough." "That's good. Real good." He hesitated. "Mrs. Gaines asked me to pass along another invitation. She's hosting a ladies' tea next week. She'd be pleased if you'd come." Rosalie's stomach tightened. "I'll think about it." She was real insistent, said it'd be a shame if you didn't. The subtext was clear. Refuse. And it'd be seen as another slight. Another reason for the town to whisper. "Tell her I'll be there," Rosalie said before she could stop herself. Tom smiled. "I will. Good to see you, ma'am." He walked off, and Rosalie stood there, already regretting her decision. When she told Declan later, he went still. "You said yes." "I did." "Why?" "Because I'm tired of being the coward." "You're not a coward." "Then what am I?" "Smart, self-preserving. Or maybe I'm just running." She crossed her arms. "You said I always have a choice. Well, I'm making one. I'm going." Declan's jaw tightened. "Then I'm coming with you." "It's a ladies' tea." "I don't care." "Declan, if they're going to humiliate you, they'll have to do it in front of me." She stared at him, caught between frustration and something warmer. "You can't protect me from everything." "I can try." The day of the tea arrived too quickly. Rosalie dressed in her best, a simple gray dress, mended but clean. She braided her hair, pinned it up, and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked older than she had 6 months ago. Harder, the soft edges worn away by wind and work. Declan drove her into town in silence. When they arrived at the Gaines house, a sprawling 2-story with a manicured lawn, he helped her down and said, "I'll be at the saloon. You need me. You send someone." "I'll be fine. I know you will." He paused. "But if you're not, I'll burn this place to the ground." Despite everything, she smiled. "That's dramatic." "I'm not joking." She believed him. Inside, the parlor was filled with women. Rosalie recognized most of them: Mrs. Gaines, Mrs. Hadley, the banker's wife, the doctor's wife, half a dozen others. They all turned when she entered, conversations dying mid-sentence. Mrs. Gaines rose, smiling. "Rosalie, how lovely you could join us. Thank you for the invitation." "Of course. Come, sit. We were just discussing the spring planting." Rosalie took a seat on the edge of the group, acutely aware of how out of place she felt. These women wore silk and lace. Their hands were soft, unblemished. They'd never mucked a stall or dug a drainage trench. The conversation resumed, carefully polite. Too polite. They asked her questions. How was the ranch? How was Mr. Crowe? Was she finding frontier life challenging? She answered briefly, offering nothing they could twist. Then Mrs. Gaines leaned forward, her smile sharp. "You know, Rosalie, we were all so surprised when Declan married again. After Catherine, we thought he'd given up on the idea entirely." The room went quiet. Rosalie kept her voice even. "People change. Do they?" Mrs. Gaines tilted her head. "Or do they just settle?" The word landed like a slap. One of the other women, Mrs. Brennan, the banker's wife, chimed in. "I'm sure Mr. Crowe had his reasons, though it must be difficult being compared to a first wife, especially one so beloved." Rosalie's hands tightened in her lap. "I'm not trying to replace anyone." "Of course not," Mrs. Gaines said smoothly. "But you must wonder sometimes what he saw in you, why he chose you, of all people." The implication was clear. She wasn't chosen. She was purchased, a transaction. Rosalie stood. Every eye in the room locked on her. "You're right," she said quietly. "I do wonder. I wonder why a man like Declan Crowe would marry someone like me, someone with nothing to offer, no money, no status, No family worth mentioning. Mrs. Gaines's smile widened. Exactly. So why do you think? Because he's kind. Rosalie's voice cut through the room. Because when my father sold me to save himself, Declan gave me a choice. He gave me a home, a life, and asked for nothing in return. And maybe that's something you can't understand. Because kindness doesn't have a price tag. It doesn't come with conditions. It just is. The women stared at her, stunned. Rosalie picked up her shawl. Thank you for the tea, Mrs. Gaines, but I think I'm done here. She walked out, heart pounding, hands shaking. Outside, the air felt cleaner. She stood on the porch, breathing hard, trying to steady herself. Behind her, the door opened. Mrs. Hadley stepped out. That was brave. Or stupid. Maybe both. The older woman studied her. You know they'll talk. Let them. Mrs. Hadley almost smiled. You're stronger than I thought. I had to be. The woman nodded, then went back inside. Rosalie walked to the saloon, pushed through the doors. Declan was at the bar, nursing a whiskey. He looked up, saw her face, and immediately stood. What happened? Nothing I couldn't handle. Rosalie, can we just go home? He threw money on the bar, took her arm, and led her outside. They didn't speak until they were out of town, the valley opening up around them. Then Declan said, Tell me. So she did. She told him everything, the questions, the implications, the way they'd looked at her like she was something pathetic. And when she finished, she was shaking with anger and humiliation and something close to grief. Declan pulled the wagon to a stop. He turned to her, his expression hard. They have no right. They think they do. They're wrong. Are they? Her voice broke. I am the girl who was sold, Declan. That's the truth, and nothing I say will change it. Then we change what it means. She looked at him, confused. How? He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the valley. Then he said, Tomorrow, I'll show you. The next morning, Declan woke her before dawn. Get dressed. We're going into town. Why? You'll see. She didn't argue. They rode in as the sun rose, painting the sky pink and gold. The town was mostly empty, just a few early risers sweeping storefronts. Declan pulled the wagon up in front of the land office and climbed down. Wait here, he said. He went inside. Rosalie sat in the wagon, baffled, watching through the window as Declan spoke with the clerk. Papers were signed. Money changed hands. Then Declan came back out, holding a rolled document. He climbed up beside her, handed it over. Open it. She unrolled the paper, read it once, then again, her breath catching. It was a deed. 200 acres of Declan's land transferred into her name. What is this? Proof. Of what? That you're not property, that you never were. He looked at her, steady and certain. That land is yours, Rosalie. Legally, completely. You can sell it, keep it, do whatever you want with it, and no one, not me, not your father, not anyone, can take it from you. Tears burned her eyes. Declan, I can't. You can, and you will. But why? Because I want you to have a choice, stay or go. That's up to you. But either way, you'll have something that's yours. She stared at him, overwhelmed. This man, this impossible, stubborn, broken man. He'd just given her freedom, real freedom. What if I stay? She whispered. His hand came up, cupped her face. Then you stay because you want to, not because you have to. She leaned into his touch, and for the first time since the wedding, she felt something other than fear or obligation. She felt hope. But the town wasn't finished with them yet. Word of the land transfer spread fast. By noon, everyone knew, and by evening, the whispers had turned vicious. Declan heard it from the blacksmith. Rosalie heard it from Mrs. Hadley, who came by the ranch, tight-lipped and angry. People are saying terrible things, the woman said, that you manipulated him, that you're after his money. Rosalie's stomach sank. That's not. I know, but they don't care. Mrs. Hadley sighed. Mrs. Gaines is behind it. She's telling everyone you've bewitched him, that you're no better than a... She stopped, flushing. A what? I won't repeat it. Rosalie's hands clenched. Let them talk. They're not just talking. They're planning something. I don't know what, but Mrs. Gaines is gathering people. making alliances. I wanted to warn you. After she left, Rosalie found Declan in the barn. We need to talk. He looked up from the saddle he was oiling. I already know. Then you know this is my fault. No, it's theirs. Declan, let me handle it. How? His jaw set. I don't know yet, but I will. That night Rosalie lay awake, the deed to her land folded under her pillow. She thought about leaving, taking the land, selling it, starting over somewhere far away where no one knew her story. But the thought of leaving Declan made her chest ache. She'd fallen for him, completely, impossibly. And she had no idea what to do about it. The next morning, Rosalie woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and found Declan outside, repairing a section of the porch railing that had been loose for weeks. He worked with sharp, angry movements, driving nails harder than necessary. She watched him for a moment before speaking. You didn't sleep. Didn't need to. Declan, I'm handling it. By fixing the porch? He stopped, hammer in mid-swing, and looked at her. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight. By doing something useful instead of sitting around thinking about what they're saying. Rosalie crossed her arms. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. That's not an answer. It's the truth. He set down the hammer, wiped his hands on his pants. I've been going over it all night, every option, every move I could make, and they all end the same way. How? With you getting hurt. She stepped closer. I'm already hurt. They've already said their piece. The question is what we do now. We? Yes, we. Her voice hardened. This affects both of us, whether you like it or not. He studied her, and something in his expression shifted. You're right. So what do we do? Declan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the valley. Then he said, we face them, together. How? Sunday, at the church, when everyone's there. Rosalie's stomach dropped. You want to confront them in front of the whole town? I want to make it clear who you are, what you mean. He turned to her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I want them to see that you're not some transaction. You're my wife, my equal, and if they can't respect that, they can go to hell. The words hung in the air between them, raw and unfiltered. Rosalie swallowed hard. You really think that'll change anything? Maybe not. But at least they'll know where we stand. She wanted to argue, to tell him it was a bad idea, that it would only make things worse. But looking at him, at the determination in his face, the protectiveness in his stance, she realized he needed this. Not for her, for himself. To finally stand up and fight instead of retreating into silence. All right, she said quietly. Sunday. The days leading up to Sunday crawled by. Rosalie tried to keep busy, throwing herself into the garden, the chickens, anything to keep her mind occupied. But the dread sat heavy in her chest, growing with each passing hour. Declan was different, focused. He moved through the ranch with purpose, as if preparing for battle. He sharpened his tools, mended fences, organized the barn. Everything had to be in order. As if control over the physical world could somehow translate to control over what was coming. On Saturday night, Rosalie couldn't take the silence anymore. She found him in the barn, checking the horses. Are you sure about this? She asked. He didn't look up from the hoof he was inspecting. No. Then why are we doing it? Because I'm tired of letting other people define you. He set down the horse's leg, straightened. And I'm tired of hiding. We're not hiding. We're just living our lives. Are we? He turned to face her. Or are we just avoiding the inevitable? She didn't have an answer for that. Declan stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight he'd been carrying. I should have done this months ago, should have stood up the first time someone said something, but I didn't. I let it fester, and now it's gotten worse. This isn't your fault. Isn't it? His voice was rough. I brought you into this. I made you my wife without thinking about what that would mean for you, how they'd treat you. You gave me a choice between the street and this. That's not much of a choice. Rosalie reached out, placed her hand on his chest. His heart was pounding beneath her palm. It was enough. And I'm still here, aren't I? He covered her hand with his, held it there. You could leave. You have the land now. You could sell it, start over somewhere. They don't know your story. Is that what you want? No. The word came out fierce, almost angry. But what I want doesn't matter. What matters is what's best for you. And you think leaving is best? I think staying might destroy you. She looked up at him, at the man who'd given her everything and asked for nothing, and felt something break open inside her chest. You're wrong. Am I? Yes. She took a breath, steadying herself. Leaving would destroy me, because I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been if I'd just stayed, if I'd fought for this. His grip on her hand tightened. Fought for what? For us. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Declan stared at her, something raw and vulnerable flickering across his face. Then he pulled away, turned back to the horse. You should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be hard. It was a dismissal, a retreat. But Rosalie didn't push. She'd said what she needed to say. The rest was up to him. Sunday morning arrived cold and clear. Rosalie, dressed in the same gray dress she'd worn to the tea, brushed her hair until it shone and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked pale, nervous, scared. She forced herself to stand straighter, to lift her chin. Whatever happened today, she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Downstairs, Declan was already waiting. He wore his best shirt, his good hat. He looked like a man preparing for a funeral. They rode to town in silence. The church bells were ringing when they arrived, calling the faithful to service. People were already gathering outside, clusters of families, neighbors greeting each other, children running between wagons. All of them stopped and stared when Declan and Rosalie pulled up. Declan helped her down, his hand steady on her arm. Stay close, he murmured. She nodded. They walked toward the church together, and the crowd parted like water. Whispers followed them, sharp and cutting. There she is. Bold as brass. Shameless. Rosalie kept her eyes forward, her hand tight on Declan's arm. He didn't acknowledge the whispers, just kept walking, head high. Inside, the church was packed. Every pew filled, every inch of space occupied. Reverend Moss stood at the front, Bible in hand, watching them enter with carefully neutral expression. Declan led Rosalie to a pew near the front. His usual spot, she realized. The people around them shifted, creating space, but no one spoke. No one acknowledged them. The service began. Hymns were sung, prayers recited, scripture read. Rosalie barely heard any of it. She was too aware of the eyes on her back, the weight of judgment pressing down from all sides. When Reverend Moss began his sermon, Rosalie tried to focus. He talked about community, about charity, about loving thy neighbor. The irony wasn't lost on her. Then halfway through, Declan stood up. The church went silent. Reverend Moss stopped mid-sentence, staring. Mr. Crowe? Declan didn't sit back down. He turned, facing the congregation. I have something to say. Moss hesitated. This isn't really the time. It's exactly the time. Declan's voice carried through the church, strong and clear. You're all here, all gathered, and you need to hear this. Rosalie's heart hammered. She wanted to pull him back down, to stop whatever was about to happen, but she didn't move. Declan looked out at the crowd, at Mrs. Gaines in her fine silk dress, at the Hadleys, the Brennans, the Fishers, at every face that had whispered about Rosalie, every tongue that had spread lies. Most of you know me, he said. I've lived in this valley for 15 years. I've traded with you, worked alongside you, kept to myself. And when my first wife died, you left me alone. You didn't pry, didn't ask questions. You respected my grief. He paused, letting that sink in. But when I married Rosalie, that respect disappeared. You decided her business was your business. You decided to judge her, to mock her, to spread lies about who she is and why she's here. Mrs. Gaines stood up. Mr. Crowe, this is highly inappropriate. Sit down. The command in his voice was absolute. Mrs. Gaines sat. Declan continued. You want to know the truth? Fine. Here it is. Rosalie's father owed me money. A lot of money. He couldn't pay. And rather than take his land and leave his daughter with nothing, I offered another solution. Marriage. Gasps rippled through the church. But here's what you don't understand, Declan said, his voice rising. I didn't do it to own her. I did it to save her. Because I know what happens to women with no family, no money, no options. They end up on the street or worse. And I couldn't let that happen. He turned, looked down at Rosalie. When I married her, I asked for nothing. I gave her her own room, her own space. I never touched her without permission, never demanded anything she wasn't willing to give. Because I didn't want a servant or a possession. I wanted to give her a chance, a choice. Rosalie's throat tightened. Declan turned back to the crowd. And then, when I realized she might still feel trapped, I gave her 200 acres of my land, legally hers, so she could leave if she wanted, so she'd never have to depend on me or anyone else. The church was dead silent now, every eye on Declan. So you can call it whatever you want, he said, his voice hard. A transaction, an arrangement, a purchase. But I call it what it is, a marriage based on respect, on choice, on the belief that everyone deserves a second chance. He looked at Mrs. Gaines. You asked Rosalie how it feels to be bought. Well, here's my question for you. How does it feel to be so empty inside that the only way you can feel important is by tearing someone else down? Mrs. Gaines's face went white. Declan's gaze swept the room. Rosalie is my wife, my equal, my partner. And if any of you have a problem with that, you take it up with me. Not her, me. He sat down. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then Reverend Moss cleared his throat. Well, that was certainly forthright. He looked uncomfortable, out of his depth. Perhaps we should continue with the service. No one moved. Finally, an older man near the back stood up. Rosalie recognized him, Mr. Cartwright, who ran the lumber mill. He was weathered, gruff, not the type to get involved in town politics. I think Crowe's right, Cartwright said gruffly. We've been acting like a bunch of gossiping hens. Man wants to marry a woman and treat her decent. That's his business, not ours. Another man stood, then another. Slowly, a handful of people rose, nodding their agreement. But just as many stayed seated, including Mrs. Gaines, whose face was now red with fury. The service resumed, but it was strained, awkward. When it finally ended, people filed out quickly, avoiding eye contact. Declan and Rosalie were among the last to leave. As they stepped outside, Mrs. Gaines blocked their path. You've made a grave mistake, she said coldly. Declan looked at her, unmoved. The only mistake I made was not doing this sooner. You think this changes anything? You think one speech will make them forget? No, but it'll make them think twice before they talk. Mrs. Gaines smiled, sharp and vicious. You've just made an enemy, Mr. Crowe, and I promise you, you'll regret it. I've had worse enemies than you. She turned to Rosalie, her eyes full of contempt. And you. You may have fooled him, but you haven't fooled me. I know what you are. Rosalie met her gaze, steady and unflinching. And what's that? A gold digger, a manipulator, a woman who saw an opportunity and took it. Think what you want, Rosalie said quietly. I know the truth. So does Declan. And that's all that matters. Mrs. Gaines's smile faltered. She stepped aside, letting them pass. As they walked to the wagon, Rosalie's legs felt shaky, her heart still racing. Declan helped her up, then climbed beside her and took the reins. They didn't speak until they were out of town, the valley opening up around them. Then Rosalie said, That was insane. I know. You just declared war on half the town. I know. They're going to make our lives hell. Probably. She looked at him, and despite everything, she felt a smile tugging at her lips. You're crazy. He glanced at her, and for the first time in days, his expression softened. Maybe, but I meant every word. I know you did. They rode in silence for a while, the tension slowly easing. Then Declan said, You could still leave, you know. This doesn't change that. I know. And? Rosalie looked out at the land, her land, legally and completely. The valley stretched wide and open, the mountains framing it like a promise. She thought about what Declan had said in the church, about choice, about respect, about believing everyone deserved a second chance. I'm not leaving, she said. Declan's hands tightened on the reins. Why not? She turned to him, and the words came easier than she expected. Because this is home now, and because I want to see what happens next. His throat worked. Rosalie, and because I love you. The wagon jerked to a stop. Declan stared at her, stunned. What? You heard me? You can't. I can, and I do. She reached over, placed her hand on his, I didn't plan it, didn't want it. But somewhere along the way it happened, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't. He looked down at their joined hands, his face a storm of emotions. I don't deserve that. Probably not, but you're stuck with it anyway. He laughed, sharp and disbelieving. Then he pulled her close, his forehead pressing against hers. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Be loved. Be someone worth loving. Then we'll figure it out together. He kissed her then. It was clumsy, desperate, full of months of unspoken feeling. And when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. I love you too, he said, his voice rough. I didn't think I could. After Catherine, after everything. But I do. Rosalie's eyes burned. Then that's enough. They sat there in the wagon, holding each other, while the sun climbed higher and the valley spread out before them, wild and beautiful and theirs. The fallout from Sunday's confrontation came swiftly. By Monday afternoon, word had spread that the Gaines family was refusing to do business with anyone who associated with the Crows. Mrs. Gaines was leveraging her husband's influence, pressuring merchants, ranchers, and tradesmen to pick a side. Some caved. Others, like Mr. Cartwright, refused. The valley was fracturing, and Declan and Rosalie were at the center of it. Tom Fisher showed up at the ranch on Tuesday, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Gaines sent me, he said. He wants to know if you'd be willing to meet, talk things out. Declan crossed his arms. Talk about what? Finding a solution, something that works for everyone. There's nothing to solve. I said what I needed to say. Tom shifted his weight. With respect, sir, this is getting out of hand. People are taking sides. It's bad for business. Then maybe they should have thought of that before they started spreading lies. Tom looked at Rosalie, almost apologetic. Mrs. Crowe, I don't mean any disrespect, but Mrs. Gaines isn't backing down. And if this keeps up, it's going to hurt a lot of people. Rosalie stepped forward. What does she want? I don't know. But Mr. Gaines seems to think he can mediate. Declan shook his head. Tell him no. Declan, Rosalie touched his arm. Maybe we should hear them out. Why? So they can try to bully us into apologizing? No, so we can end this. He looked at her conflicted. You really think talking will help? I think it's worth trying. He didn't like it, that much was clear, but he nodded. Fine. We'll meet, but on neutral ground. And if they try anything, we leave, Rosalie finished. I know. The meeting was set for Friday at the land office, a neutral location where both parties felt comfortable. Declan and Rosalie arrived early, standing outside while they waited. You nervous? Declan asked. Terrified. Me too. That surprised her. Declan never admitted fear. Mr. Gaines arrived a few minutes later without his wife. He was a tall, imposing man in his 50s, with silver hair and a stern face. He greeted them with a curt nod. Crowe. Mrs. Crowe. Gaines. They went inside. The clerk made himself scarce, leaving them alone in the small office. Gaines sat behind the desk, folded his hands. I'll be direct. My wife is furious. She feels publicly humiliated. That was the point, Declan said flatly. Gaines's jaw tightened. Be that as it may, this situation is causing problems. People are refusing to work together. Trade is suffering. And frankly, it's getting ridiculous. So what do you want from us? An apology, publicly. To my wife and the community. Declan laughed. Absolutely not. Gaines's eyes narrowed. You're willing to let this destroy the valley. I'm willing to let people face the consequences of their actions. You're being stubborn. I'm being honest, Rosalie cut in. Mr. Gaines, what your wife did to me was cruel. She humiliated me in front of everyone at that tea. She spread lies, and Declan defended me. That's all he did. By making a spectacle in the church. By telling the truth. Gaines sighed, rubbing his temples. Look, I understand you're upset, and I agree my wife can be difficult, but this vendetta is hurting everyone. Can't we find some middle ground? Declan leaned forward. Here's the middle ground. Your wife stops spreading lies about Rosalie. She treats her with basic respect, and in return, we won't bring up her behavior again. She won't agree to that. Then we've got nothing to discuss. Gaines stared at him, frustrated. You're going to regret this. Maybe. but I'll regret it less than letting my wife be disrespected." The meeting ended there. No resolution, no compromise. Just two men staring each other down, neither willing to bend. As they left, Rosalie felt a strange mix of relief and dread. They'd stood their ground, but they'd also made powerful enemies. The next few weeks were hard. Some of the local merchants refused to sell to them. Others jacked up their prices, knowing Declan had few options. Supplies became scarce, and small annoyances piled up. Lost orders, delayed deliveries, convenient mistakes. But Declan didn't flinch. He found ways around the obstacles, trading with ranchers outside the valley, traveling farther for supplies. And Rosalie helped, learning to be resourceful, to make do with less. They worked together, side by side, and the bond between them deepened. One night, as they sat by the fire after a long day, Rosalie said, "Do you ever regret it? What you did in the church?" Declan looked at her, surprised. "No, do you?" "No, but I worry about what it's costing you." "It's costing us, and it's worth it." "How can you be sure?" He reached over, took her hand. "Because I'd rather fight the whole world with you than live in peace without you." Her heart clenched. "You mean that?" "Every word." She leaned against him, and they sat there in comfortable silence, the fire crackling, the night settling around them. For the first time since the wedding, Rosalie felt truly at peace. But peace, she was learning, was fragile. The first sign of trouble came in early May. One of Declan's cattle was found dead, shot through the head. Then a section of fence was cut, letting 24 head loose. Then the barn door was set on fire in the middle of the night. Declan put out the flames before they spread, but the message was clear. Someone wanted them gone. Declan reported it to the sheriff, a rotund man named Harris, who looked deeply uncomfortable. "You got any idea who might have done this?" "Take a guess." Harris sighed. "I can't go accusing people without proof, Crowe." "Then find proof." "I'll look into it. But between you and me, you might want to consider making peace with the Gaines family." Declan's expression darkened. "Is that your professional advice or a threat?" "It's reality. They've got influence. And if you keep pushing, this is only going to get worse." "Let it." Harris left, shaking his head. That night, Rosalie couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the fire, about how close they'd come to losing everything, about how far someone was willing to go to hurt them. She went downstairs and found Declan at the table cleaning his rifle. "You think they'll come back?" she asked. "Probably." "And you're just going to wait for them?" "No, I'm going to be ready." She sat across from him, watching as he methodically worked. "This is my fault." He looked up. "How do you figure? If we hadn't... Stop." His voice was firm. "This isn't on you. It's on them. And I'll be damned if I let you take the blame. But no buts. We're in this together, remember?" She nodded, throat tight. Declan set down the rifle, reached across the table, and took her hand. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Then trust that I'll keep us safe." She wanted to. But fear had a way of making promises feel hollow. The harassment continued. Small things at first. Tools going missing, water troughs tainted, livestock spooked in the night. Then bigger. A fire in the hay barn, rocks thrown through windows, threats left nailed to the door. Declan hired a couple of ranch hands from outside the valley, men who owed him favors and didn't care about local politics. They helped patrol the property, keep watch at night. But the tension was wearing on both of them. One morning, Rosalie found Declan standing on the porch, staring out at the valley, his face haggard. "You need to rest," she said. "Can't." "Declan, if I stop, they win." "And if you collapse?" He didn't answer. She stepped closer, placed her hand on his back. "You can't fight this alone." "I'm not alone. I have you." "Then let me help." He turned, and the exhaustion in his eyes broke her heart. "You're helping, just by being here." "That's not enough." "It is for me." She pulled him into her arms, and he let her, his head resting against hers. They stood there for a long time, holding each other against the weight of everything trying to tear them apart. But Rosalie knew something had to change. They couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over their shoulders, waiting for the next attack. Something had to give. And she was starting to realize that maybe the only way forward was to stop reacting and start fighting back. The idea came to Rosalie on a Tuesday morning while she was feeding the chickens. She stood there, scattering grain, watching the birds peck and squabble, and suddenly it clicked. They'd been playing defense this whole time, reacting to attacks, fortifying their position, trying to outlast the storm. But defense only worked if the other side eventually got tired. And Mrs. Gaines didn't seem like the type to tire easily. What they needed was offense. She found Declan at the barn, mucking stalls. He looked up when she entered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You all right?" "I have an idea." He leaned on the pitchfork. "I'm listening." "We've been letting them control the narrative. Everything that's happened, they've framed it their way. We need to change that." "How?" "By showing the town who we really are. Not through speeches or confrontations, through actions." Declan frowned. "What kind of actions?" "The kind that prove we're not the people they think we are." She stepped closer, her mind racing. "Mrs. Gaines has convinced half the valley that I'm a manipulator and you're a fool. But what if we showed them something different? What if we became the kind of people they can't ignore?" "You want to win them over." "No. I want to make them irrelevant." He studied her, something shifting in his expression. "Keep talking." Rosalie took a breath. "The Millers. You know them? The family on the East Ridge? Lost their barn in that storm last month? That's them. I heard Mrs. Hadley talking about it. They're struggling, can't afford to rebuild. Mr. Miller's been trying to do it himself, but he's got a bad back and 3 young kids." Declan's eyes narrowed. "You want us to help them?" "I want us to rebuild their barn, for free." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Gaines will spin it. Say we're trying to buy loyalty. Let her. The Millers will know the truth, and so will anyone else paying attention. It won't stop the harassment. Maybe not, but it'll remind people that there's more to life than taking sides in someone else's vendetta." Declan set down the pitchfork, crossed his arms. "You really think this'll work?" "I think it's better than sitting here waiting for the next fire." He looked at her, and slowly a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You're something else. You know that? Is that a yes?" "It's a yes." They rode out to the Miller place the next morning, bringing lumber, tools, and the 2 ranch hands Declan had hired. The Millers lived in a small, weathered cabin surrounded by patchy fields and half-broken fences. The barn, or what was left of it, sat in a pile of splintered wood and twisted metal. Mrs. Miller answered the door, a thin woman in her 30s with tired eyes and flour on her hands. She blinked when she saw them. "Mr. Crowe? Mrs. Crowe?" "Morning," Declan said, tipping his hat. "Heard you lost your barn." She glanced past them at the wreckage, then back. "We did. Storm took it clean off the foundation." "We'd like to help rebuild it." Mrs. Miller's eyes widened. "Oh, we couldn't possibly. We don't have money to pay." "We're not asking for payment," Rosalie said gently. "We're offering help." Neighbor to neighbor. Mrs. Miller looked between them, confusion and wariness crossing her face. Why? It was a fair question. In a valley where nothing came free, kindness was suspicious. Declan met her gaze steadily. "Because you need it, and we can give it." Mrs. Miller's throat worked. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Rosalie said. A man appeared behind Mrs. Miller, her husband, lean and weathered with shoulders that hunched forward like he was carrying too much weight. "What's going on?" Mrs. Miller turned. "The Crows are offering to rebuild our barn. For free." Mr. Miller's eyes went hard. "We don't need charity." "It's not charity," Declan said. "It's help. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Charity comes with conditions. Help doesn't." Mr. Miller stared at him, jaw tight. Then he looked at the pile of rubble that used to be his barn, at his 3 kids peeking out from behind their mother's skirts, at his wife's exhausted face. Finally he said, "All right, but I work alongside you. I'm not standing by while someone else fixes my problems." Declan nodded. "Fair enough." They started that day, clearing debris, salvaging what they could, laying new foundation posts. It was brutal work. The sun beat down, the wood was heavy, and Mr. Miller's pride made him push harder than his body could handle. By midday, he was limping. Declan noticed. Take a break. I'm fine. You're favoring your left side. I said I'm fine. Declan didn't argue, just handed him a water jug and moved to a different section. Rosalie worked alongside Mrs. Miller, hauling smaller boards, organizing nails and tools. The woman was quiet at first, wary, but as the hours passed, she started to open up. People have been talking about you, she said, stacking lumber. Saying all kinds of things. Rosalie kept working. I know. Are they true? Depends on what you've heard. Mrs. Miller hesitated. That your father sold you. That Mr. Crowe bought you like livestock. My father owed Declan money. Declan offered marriage as a way to settle the debt and give me a home. That's the truth. And you agreed? I didn't have much choice, but Declan never treated me like property. He gave me my own space, my own land. He gave me freedom. Mrs. Miller was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Gaines said you manipulated him. Mrs. Gaines doesn't know what she's talking about. I believe you. Rosalie looked up, surprised. Mrs. Miller met her eyes. Anyone who'd come out here and work this hard just to help someone they barely know. That's not a manipulator. That's just a good person. Rosalie's throat tightened. Thank you. They worked until sundown, then packed up and headed home. As they rode back, Declan glanced at Rosalie. You were right. About what? This. It felt good. Doing something that mattered. She smiled. It's not over yet. I know, but it's a start. They returned to the Miller place every day for a week. Slowly, the barn took shape. Other people started showing up, neighbors who'd heard what was happening and wanted to help. Mr. Cartwright brought extra lumber. A young couple brought food. Even Tom Fisher stopped by, looking uncomfortable but sincere. Mr. Gaines doesn't know I'm here, Tom said quietly. But I wanted to help. Declan clapped him on the shoulder. Then grab a hammer. By the end of the week, the barn was finished. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid. Straight walls, good roof, doors that opened and closed. Mr. Miller stood in front of it, staring like he couldn't quite believe it was real. I don't know how to thank you, he said, voice rough. Don't thank us, Declan said. Thank everyone who showed up. Mr. Miller turned to the small crowd that had gathered. Neighbors, friends, people who'd put aside the valley's politics long enough to do something decent. I won't forget this. Neither would anyone else. Because word spread fast. Within days, the whole valley knew what the Crows had done. And for the first time, the whispers weren't cruel. They were confused, uncertain. People who'd been so sure Rosalie was a gold digger couldn't quite reconcile that image with a woman who'd spent a week in the sun rebuilding a stranger's barn. Mrs. Gaines, predictably, was furious. Rosalie heard about it from Mrs. Hadley, who stopped by the ranch with fabric samples and barely concealed glee. She's telling everyone you're trying to buy goodwill, that it's all for show. Let her, Rosalie said, sorting through the fabrics. It's not working, though. People are starting to question her, starting to wonder if maybe she's been wrong about you. Good. Mrs. Hadley leaned in conspiratorially. Between you and me, I think you've got her rattled. She's not used to losing control. Rosalie met her eyes. I'm not trying to control anything. I'm just trying to live my life. Well, you're doing a damn fine job of it. After Mrs. Hadley left, Rosalie stood on the porch, looking out at the valley. The garden was growing, green shoots pushing through the soil, wildflowers blooming along the fence. The ranch felt more like home than it ever had. And for the first time since the wedding, she felt like she belonged. Declan came up beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. What are you thinking? That maybe we're going to be okay. Maybe? She leaned into him. Probably. He kissed the top of her head. I'll take probably. But Mrs. Gaines wasn't done. The next attack came on a Sunday night. Rosalie woke to the sound of breaking glass and Declan shouting. She stumbled out of bed, heart racing, and ran downstairs. Declan was already at the window, rifle in hand. Stay back. What's happening? Someone threw a rock through the window. Rosalie peered over his shoulder. Outside, in the moonlight, she could see a figure on horseback, riding away fast. Declan raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel. Don't, Rosalie said quickly. You'll hit him. That's the point. And then what? The sheriff arrests you for shooting someone? That's exactly what they want. Declan's jaw clenched, but he lowered the rifle. They're not going to stop. I know. He turned to her, and the frustration in his face was almost unbearable. What do you want me to do, Rosalie? Just let them keep coming? No. I want you to be smart. She stepped closer, placed her hand on his chest. We're winning. Slowly, but we're winning. Don't give them a reason to turn the town against us again. He closed his eyes, exhaling hard. I hate this. So do I. But we're not alone anymore. People are starting to see the truth. Not enough people. Then we keep going. We keep showing them who we are. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I don't know how you stay so calm. I'm not calm. I'm terrified, but I'm also stubborn. Despite everything, he laughed. Yeah, you are. They spent the next hour cleaning up the glass, boarding the window. When they finally went back to bed, Rosalie lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Declan's breathing beside her. She'd meant what she said. They were winning. But it was slow, exhausting, and there was no guarantee it would be enough. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mr. Cartwright showed up at the ranch one afternoon, hat in hand, looking grim. Got something you need to see. Declan frowned. What is it? Cartwright pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. Found this nailed to my mill this morning. Declan took it, read it, and his expression darkened. He handed it to Rosalie. The note was short, written in rough block letters. Anyone who helps the Crows will pay. Rosalie's stomach sank. They're threatening you? Not just me, Cartwright said. Miller got one too. So did the Johnsons and the Parkers. Anyone who helped with the barn. Declan swore under his breath. This is escalating. It is. And people are scared. Cartwright looked between them. But they're also angry. Most folks don't take kindly to being bullied. What are you saying? I'm saying you've got more allies than you think, and if you're planning to stand up to the Gaines family, you won't be standing alone. Rosalie's heart pounded. How many people are we talking about? At least a dozen families, maybe more. Declan shook his head. I can't ask people to risk their livelihoods for us. You're not asking, we're offering. Cartwright straightened his shoulders. We've let the Gaines family run this valley for too long, dictating who we trade with, who we talk to, who we help. It's gotten out of hand, and someone needs to push back. Rosalie looked at Declan. This is our chance. He met her eyes, and she could see the conflict there. The part of him that wanted to fight, and the part that wanted to protect everyone from the fallout. Finally, he nodded. All right, we push back. Cartwright smiled, grim but determined. Good, because we're meeting tomorrow night. Your place. Bring coffee. The next evening, the ranch house was packed. Families Rosalie barely knew crowded into the main room, standing shoulder to shoulder, talking in low voices. The Millers were there, the Johnsons, the Parkers, Tom Fisher, looking nervous but resolute. Even a few people Rosalie had never met. Declan stood at the front of the room, Rosalie beside him. He waited until everyone quieted, then spoke. I won't waste your time. You all know why we're here. The Gaines family has been using intimidation and threats to control this valley, and it's gotten worse since Rosalie and I stood up to them. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. But here's the thing, Declan continued. This isn't just about us anymore. They're threatening anyone who associates with us, anyone who helped rebuild the Miller barn, anyone who refuses to take sides in their vendetta, and that's not right. Mr. Miller stepped forward. So what do we do about it? We stop being afraid, Rosalie said. All eyes turned to her. She took a breath, steadying herself. The Gaines family has power because we give it to them, because we're scared of what they'll do if we don't fall in line. But what if we stopped caring? What if we traded with each other, helped each other, built our own network that doesn't depend on their approval? They'll retaliate, someone said. Probably, Rosalie admitted, but they're already retaliating. At least this way we're not alone. Cartwright spoke up. She's right. We've been isolated, picked off one by one. But together, we're stronger. We can support each other, share resources, make sure no one family bears the brunt of their anger. Tom Fisher cleared his throat. What about the law? Can't the sheriff do something? Declan shook his head. Sheriff Harris won't touch this. The Gaines family has too much influence. Then we're on our own. We always have been, Declan said. The difference is, now we're on our own together. There was a long silence. Then Mr. Miller said, "I'm in." "So am I," said Mrs. Johnson. One by one, people spoke up, committing, pledging support. By the end of the night, over 15 families had agreed to stand together. It wasn't a majority, but it was enough. The Gaines family's response was swift and brutal. Within a week, they'd called in debts, cut off trade routes, and pressured merchants to blacklist anyone in the alliance. It hurt. Families struggled. Some wavered, but they held together. Cartwright organized supply runs to towns outside the valley. The Millers shared their harvest with families who'd lost access to the general store. Declan opened his land for communal grazing. Rosalie started a trading network, connecting people who had surplus with people who had need. It was messy, complicated, and far from perfect. But it worked. And slowly the tide began to turn. People who'd stayed neutral started questioning why they were letting one family dictate the valley's future. Merchants who'd gone along with the Gaines family's demands started to resent being used as pawns. Even Sheriff Harris, spineless as he was, couldn't ignore the growing discontent. The breaking point came in late June. Mrs. Gaines made a mistake. She tried to force the church to ban the Crows and their allies from services. Reverend Moss, who'd stayed carefully neutral, finally drew a line. He stood in front of the congregation and said, "This is a house of worship, not a political battlefield. Everyone is welcome here, and anyone who has a problem with that can leave." Mrs. Gaines left. So did a handful of her staunchest supporters. But most people stayed. And in that moment, everyone realized that the Gaines family's power wasn't absolute. It was conditional, and the conditions had just shifted. By July, the harassment had stopped. Not because Mrs. Gaines had given up, but because she'd lost too much support to continue. Her influence had crumbled, and without it, she was just another rancher in the valley. Declan and Rosalie stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the mountains. The valley was green now, lush with summer growth. The garden Rosalie had planted was thriving. Tomatoes, beans, carrots, and a riot of wildflowers. "We did it," Rosalie said softly. Declan slipped his arm around her. "You did it. This was your idea." "We did it together." He kissed her temple. Together. They stood there in comfortable silence, and Rosalie thought about how far they'd come. From strangers bound by obligation to partners who'd fought their way to something real. It hadn't been smooth. It hadn't been easy. But it had been worth it. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked. "With Mrs. Gaines? Probably not. She's not the forgiving type. So what do? We keep living, keep building, keep proving that we're not going anywhere." Rosalie leaned into him. "I can do that. I know you can." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Rosalie realized something. She'd spent so much of her life being afraid of poverty, of judgment, of being alone. But standing here with Declan, on land that was legally hers, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand with them, she wasn't afraid anymore. She was free. And freedom, she'd learned, wasn't something given. It was something claimed, fought for, built piece by piece until it became unshakable. The next few months passed quietly. The valley settled into a new normal. The alliance Declan and Rosalie had built became something more, a community. People traded, helped each other, supported each other through hard times. It wasn't perfect. There were still disagreements, still tensions, but it was better than what had been. Rosalie's garden expanded. She started selling produce at a small market Cartwright organized. Her wildflowers became something of a signature. People started asking for cuttings, planting them in their own yards. The valley began to bloom in ways it hadn't before. Declan softened. The hard edges that had defined him for so long started to smooth out. He smiled more, talked more, let people in. He and Rosalie fell into a rhythm, working the ranch together, eating meals together, falling asleep in each other's arms. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Declan said, "I've been thinking." "About what?" "The future." Rosalie glanced at him. "What about it?" He took her hand, threaded his fingers through hers. "I want to build something, not just a ranch. A real home. Maybe a family." Her breath caught. "Declan, I know it's soon, and I know after Catherine I said I'd never, but with you, it feels different. It feels possible." Rosalie turned to him, her eyes burning. Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm saying I want a life with you, a real one. Not just surviving, but living. She kissed him then, fierce and full of hope. When they pulled apart, she said, yes, to all of it, yes. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that lit up his whole face, the kind she'd never seen before. Yeah? Yeah. They sat there holding each other, and Rosalie thought about the journey that had brought them here. The fear, the struggle, the moments when it felt like everything would fall apart. But they'd held on, they'd fought, and they'd built something worth keeping. By the time autumn arrived, Rosalie was pregnant. It wasn't planned, but it wasn't unwelcome either. Declan was terrified at first. She could see it in his eyes, the ghost of Catherine hovering between them. But Rosalie refused to let fear win. We're not them, she told him one night. We're us, and we're going to be fine. You don't know that. Neither do you. But I'm choosing to believe it anyway. He held her close, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. I can't lose you. You won't. How can you be sure? Because I'm too stubborn to die. Despite himself, he laughed. Yeah, you are. The pregnancy was hard. Morning sickness that lasted all day, back pain, exhaustion. But Rosalie pushed through, determined. Declan hovered, overprotective and anxious, driving her crazy. But she loved him for it. Mrs. Hadley organized a group of women to help, bringing food, offering advice, checking in regularly. Even Mrs. Miller, who'd become a close friend, stopped by weekly. The community Rosalie and Declan had built rallied around them. In March, when the snow was still thick on the ground, Rosalie went into labor. Declan sent for the midwife, paced the floor, refused to leave her side. It was long, brutal, terrifying. And when the baby finally came, a girl, small but healthy, with Declan's dark hair and Rosalie's eyes, Declan wept. Rosalie held their daughter, exhausted and overwhelmed, and watched Declan touch the baby's tiny hand with trembling fingers. She's perfect, he whispered. She's ours, Rosalie said. They named her Catherine, not to replace the child Declan had lost, but to honor the memory, to acknowledge that grief and joy could coexist. The valley celebrated with them. Families brought gifts, food, well wishes. Even people who'd stayed neutral during the conflict with the Gaines family stopped by to offer congratulations. Mrs. Gaines didn't come, but Rosalie didn't expect her to. Some wounds ran too deep to heal. Spring arrived, and with it, new life. Rosalie planted apple trees on the land Declan had given her, small saplings that would take years to bear fruit. But she didn't mind. She was thinking long-term now, building a future. One afternoon, as she stood among the trees, Catherine sleeping in a sling against her chest, Declan came up beside her. What are you thinking? He asked. That I never imagined this. What? Being happy, having a family, feeling like I belong somewhere. He slipped his arm around her. You belong here. You always did. She leaned into him. I used to think freedom meant being alone, not depending on anyone. But I was wrong. What is it then? It's choosing who you depend on, who you stand with, who you build a life with. She looked up at him. It's choosing you. Every day. Not because I have to, because I want to. Declan kissed her, soft and lingering. I choose you too. They stood there together, the apple trees small and fragile around them, the valley stretching wide and open under a clear blue sky. Catherine stirred against Rosalie's chest, making small sounds, and Rosalie adjusted the sling, soothing her. Do you think she'll understand someday? Declan asked. What we went through to get here. Maybe. Or maybe she'll just take it for granted. Think this was always how things were. Would that be so bad? Rosalie thought about it. No, I think that'd be exactly right. Because it means we built something strong enough that she doesn't have to fight for it. She can just live in it. Declan nodded slowly. I like that. As the sun climbed higher, warming the earth, Rosalie thought about the girl she'd been a year and a half ago. Frightened, powerless, standing at an altar in a dress that didn't fit, marrying a stranger to survive. That girl felt like someone else now, someone distant. She'd become a woman who knew her own strength, who'd learned that survival wasn't the same as living. who discovered that the bravest thing you could do was choose to stay when leaving would be easier. And she'd learned something else too, something she wished she could tell her younger self, standing scared in that church. People would try to define you, to put you in a box, to tell you what you were worth, but you didn't have to accept their definitions. You could write your own story. You could fight for your own dignity. And if you were brave enough, stubborn enough, reckless enough to keep choosing yourself, to keep standing up, you could build something no one could take away. Not a perfect life, not a smooth one, but a real one, an honest one. A life where you looked in the mirror and recognized the person staring back. Rosalie had been sold once, but she'd bought herself back, acre by acre, choice by choice, day by day. And now she owned not just the land beneath her feet, but the life she was living. That was the real freedom. Not being alone, not being untouchable, but being whole, being seen, being chosen, and choosing in return. The valley would keep turning. Seasons would change. New challenges would come. Mrs. Gaines would probably never forgive them, and some people would always whisper. But Rosalie didn't care anymore. She had Declan. She had Catherine. She had a home, a community, a future. She had enough. And in a world that had tried to convince her she was worth nothing, that felt like everything. As they walked back toward the house, Catherine babbling softly against Rosalie's chest, Declan said, "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think you saved me." Rosalie smiled. "I think we saved each other. Maybe. But I'm pretty sure you did the heavy lifting. That's because I'm stronger than you." He laughed, full and genuine. "Yeah, you are." They reached the porch, and Rosalie stopped, turning to look back at the valley one more time. The land stretched out before her, wild, beautiful, hers. The apple trees stood in neat rows, their branches reaching toward the sky. The garden bloomed with color. The ranch hummed with life. This was what she'd fought for. Not just survival, not just freedom, but the right to build something lasting, something that mattered. And as Declan opened the door and ushered her inside, Catherine still sleeping peacefully against her, Rosalie felt a bone-deep certainty settle over her. She was home. Not because someone had given it to her, but because she'd claimed it, fought for it, made it hers through sheer force of will and stubborn hope. And no one, not Mrs. Gaines, not the whispers, not the past, could ever take that away. The door closed behind them, shutting out the world. Inside, the fire crackled. The house smelled like bread and coffee. Declan settled into his chair, and Rosalie sat beside him, Catherine between them. And for the first time in her life, Rosalie felt complete. Not because everything was perfect, but because she'd stopped waiting for perfect and started building real. And real, she'd discovered, was better.